Hey, this is Kit with Scrapbook Warehouse, and today we're going to make 3 cards using the Holtz Oxide inks. Now, I've never had the pleasure to work with the inks before, and my first choice is going to be faded jeans. I've got my watercolor paper all cut and ready to be the mat for my card front, and I'm just going to lay down some ink just like that. I've got my spritzer, just going to lay down a couple squirts. It's going to bead up on the surface, and you can see there as I get it all over my fingers. So now this paper has a smooth side and a textured side to it, and I'm going to use the smooth side just in case I decide to do some fine stamping details later. So all I do is swipe my cardstock over the ink and just let it flow all over the paper just like that. I want to get a bit more full coverage with the blue this time. And because of that, I'm not super thrilled with how little the blue has covered the cardstock, so I'm going to use my spritzer, give a couple squirts, and that will add some more liquid to allow for a better, more even coverage of the backing. Using my heat gun now, I'll set it and then make a couple decisions. I think I'm going to need to add some more color onto the corners. It's not quite what I wanted, so I'm really trying to make blue a dominant color on this card. Just mop up all my extra ink. Nothing goes to waste. And that's exactly what I wanted. Just love the look of it. So now more heat gun. Give that one final set. Love the magic of the heat gun. Now wipe off my craft mat to prepare for using my second color, which is going to be the beautiful green peeled paint. As you can see, I've got a gorgeous line here of the blue. It's fully covered. This is one I did earlier. It had a lot more green in it, and this time I wanted to focus on blue. It's such a calming, beautiful color. So I'm going to lay down some of the peeled paint onto my craft mat. Not quite as much as the blue because I'm not intending to do a full cover like I did with the earlier color of faded jeans. Just squirt my ink and soak it up. Yeah, that's perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Just going to let that run down the page a little bit. Use my heat gun to set it. Now that I've set it, you can sort of see there's a bit of a darker mark on it, sort of like a coffee ring stain, that if you don't like that, you're not happy with that, there's a really easy fix. You just take your squirt bottle and give it a couple taps of water, and that'll allow that ink to run a little more and smooth out those harsh lines. And then you can go ahead and take a paper towel and sop up some of that ink, or you can just move on to drying it like I've done here. So it's totally taken out those dark, hard lines that you may not want, but that's a personal preference and a choice that you can make as a gorgeous artist. So this is another technique using one of your acrylic stamping blocks. If you press it down into the ink, you can then press it onto your card to transfer more of that ink there, and it gives a totally different look from just putting your card directly into the ink. Gives it a really splotchy, distressed look, which I absolutely love. Then you just use your heat gun to dry that off. I'm really satisfied with the coverage of the peeled paint on my card. It looks fantastic, but I do want to add in a third color using sort of the rules of 3. So I'm going to quickly clean off my workspace, otherwise I get ink everywhere, and I'm going to move on to the absolutely delicious cracked pistachio, which I have to admit made me a little hungry. So I've got it. I'm going to lay down a little bit more of this because I love the colors so much. Squirt it with my spritzer and then get ready to cover my card in ink. So I've decided to put it in this corner right here to complement the beautiful peeled paint and just pick up all that pigment. So I'm getting the coverage I want, but not sort of the opacity, if you will, of the ink. It's not thick or dark enough, so I'm just going to dry it quickly with my dryer, and yeah, definitely not the full coverage of color that I wanted. I can still see the speckling of the peeled paint, which is beautiful, but I definitely want a little bit more intensity of the cracked pistachio. So just add a couple more layers of that, dry it with my heat gun, soak up all of that extra pigment there on my craft mat, and it's looking pretty, but not quite what I wanted. Now, this is all personal preference. You may get to this point and say, no, I love it. It's beautiful. It's done. And that's totally fine. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be perfect to you. So yeah, as you can see, it's not quite dark enough for me. So I'm going to lay down quite a bit more of the cracked pistachio. And I really pressed hard this time with my pad. Now I'm going to squirt it with my sprayer and soak up all of that gorgeous pigment. And yes, perfect. Now I'm getting that sort of deep color that I really was looking for with this particular card. Just going to keep soaking that up and letting that run all over the place. And I'm going to use my spritzer to just add a bit of liquid to allow that to flow more freely. So yeah, that's starting to look exactly what I wanted. It's so nice when that vision in your head comes out in the card that you're making. Now I'm going to pick up my heat gun and sort of push the pigment around the page like that. Get that all dried off. And to me, this is looking fantastic. I'm so pleased with my work so far. I do want to add more of the faded jean over the card overall, so I'm going to use my dauber this time. Just going to load it up with ink and then gently place that dye right on the card. Now, if you just mash your dauber on, you'll get a coffee stain ring. So you don't want to do that. You want to start off on your craft mat and slowly start pulling that color, just like I'm doing here in super speed mode. So covering all those little bit extra of clear and pale spots on the card that I wanted to get rid of. Now that that's completed, I love the look of it and the colors, but I'm thinking it's not quite perfect because it's a little too smooth and I want a little bit more of a textured look to it. So I'm going to take my spritzer and pull it way back from the card and just spray lightly once or twice, and that will actually pull the dye up from the card and give it more of a speckled egg look, which is exactly what I'm hoping to achieve here. Now I'll use my heat dryer to set the ink in place, and I'm just about ready to move on to my next step of making this card. So one of the things I like to do in my projects is to have the main color of the project sort of echoed in different spots on the card itself. So I'm going to use this stamp to add a little bit more of the faded jean. It's a Tim Holtz stamp, and there's a link below in the bottom of where you can get it. I love this stamp. It's so versatile because you can use the top or the bottom for a more dense grungy look, or sort of a more it's almost an anime manga look, like a comic book look at the top. So I'm going to ink up the one side of it, so the bottom, which has a more dense the dense little dots, and I'm going to just add my color to it as quickly as possible in like a grungy way that isn't perfect. And that's what I like about this stamp. You absolutely do not have to be perfect with your inking on it, because it's just a little bit goes a long way. So now I'm going to apply the stamp by rolling it onto the paper without using an acrylic block, and that's going to add to that distressed, not not complete covered look. And so it's almost perfect. There's just a little bit in the corner that I missed, and that's going to add the blue and pull the blue in from the top into the bottom of the card. Now that I've cleaned off my Tim Holtz stamp, I'm actually going to use the stamp set by 49th and Market. It's Gabby's Postcard from Paris set, and I absolutely adore the vintage look of all of these little stamps. So the neat thing about botanical stamps in general is that you can use them as they're meant to, or you can use them to add a little bit of texture. So just sort of getting more mileage out of those stamps and seeing them as not just a flower stamp. So I'm going to use both of these guys right here, and they're not going to come out as the actual flowers themselves. And then I'm going to use this postcard as well, which has a lovely look to it and an actually pretty cute message on it that's not gonna make it onto the card or be very visible. Now I'm using this gorgeous brown ink here. It's just a fantastic color, and it's appropriately named Vintage Photo. So I'm going to use a different inking technique by rolling this on, and that gives an imperfect coverage on the stamp, and then I'm going to roll it right onto my card to give just the hint of the postcard. Gives a little bit of the detail there, but not too much, so it's nice and faded. And I think I'm actually going to go ahead and use the last stamp from this set as well, which looks like a beautiful old letter. And I'm going to ink that up in the same method, in my rolling method. And now that I have it inked, I'm just going to lay that stamp down to give more of that beautiful brown vintage photo color onto my card. And I'm going to take these little flowers here, this gorgeous little flower, and ink up the stem, and I'm going to use that to imitate the sort of hint of botanical in my card and give it a bit of texture without it being an outright flower. So I'm doing the same with the larger flower bouquet to give a hint again of botanical and garden type look without actually having to use it. Now it's a little too intense for me and a little too focused, so yeah, the images are a bit too sharp. So I'm just going to squirt it a little bit with my spritzer and take off some of the ink with my baby wipe, which actually makes the letters run and makes it look even more like a vintage photo. My card front isn't quite complete, so I'm going to add a couple more of these stamps just to finish it off and give it a more cohesive look overall. Now I'm going to move on. I've cut out, using an MFT die, just the word friend on a piece of black cardstock, and I've gone ahead and used some thinlits for some gorgeous flowers that I'm going to lay over top of the card itself. Now that I've placed all my flower dies on the card, I'm going to turn it over and cut the black overlap off because it's just easier to see from behind. I've got it complete, and I'm just got to put in the little dots for the R and the D to make those letters really stand out. So I'm just going to use my glue here and place the D in. If you can see, the first time I did it, I made a mistake. You really should put the glue down first on the card and then put the black dye over top of it, as opposed to the glue onto the dye and then putting it onto the card. So I do it right the second time. So now I've got my gorgeous card front completed with the word friend. The final step will actually be attaching the card front onto the card. So I've put black at the top and bottom, just a little strip of it to pull in the black colors from the card itself and make it feel more cohesive. Now I'm going to apply lots of adhesive to the back of the card. Because I've used so much water on this and a lot of the oxide inks, it's really made the card itself a bit wavy, so you want to use extra adhesive to make sure it sticks properly. Then press it down onto your card backing and you've got a fantastic card that anybody would just love to receive. So I hope you liked this project, and now we're going to move on to the very next card using the same dies. So this is another card backing I prepared in much the same way, and this time I used the Hugs die from the MFT die set to cut out the word hugs, and I arranged a bunch of the thinlit flowers together in a bouquet and tied them with a bit of twine. So I'm a big fan of sort of the 3D look, so that twine is perfect. So now I'm just going to quickly put some adhesive on my thinlit flowers and attach them to my card front piece backing. Now it's simply a matter of arranging the flowers exactly how I want. They're a little bit flexible even with the adhesive on them. Before you press down, you can kind of arrange them exactly in the spots that you would like them to sit. And then I'm just going to adjust the twine bow and really stick those down so that they stay in place. And I'm just going to add a little bit more adhesive here and use this glue to make sure that the twine bow stays where it's supposed to stay. I find bows sometimes a little bit tricky, so using the glue to keep it in place is great. And then you just trim off the edges to make it look more elegant. So once I had finished putting my bouquet together, I decided that I actually wanted to add a couple more flowers. It's okay to add a little extra when you're finished. If it doesn't look quite right, never feel bad about adding a few last minute touches to really make the card feel complete. So just stick your adhesive on once you've picked where you want that very last flower to go and press it down. So this card is almost complete. I'm just going to affix it to the front of my card base. And then on the inside, I'm actually going to take another one of the dies that I cut out, a beautiful flower. I coated it with the magic wax in turquoise to give it sort of a blue sheen to echo the front of the card. Now normally you might want to put, instead of just this, you would want to put a cream or white base mat on the inside to write your sentiment on, but I was a bit rebellious and did not do that in this case. So I'm just going to add my lovely flower there, and it gives it that little extra something special for the person when they open up their card to see. Now here is the finished completed hugs card that ready to send off to a friend, and I thought, well, this envelope's pretty, it's just a basic cream envelope, it needs a little something extra. So I thought that I would do a little bit of edging using the Vintage Photo ink by Tim Holtz. So I took that, and I also took the same stamp that I used on the card, and I added a bit of green onto the envelope as well to give it an aged look. So it echoes the card inside. So I'm going to grab my ink here as well as my dauber, and I'm gently going to use the same technique I used earlier in the video on the other card to just antique the edge. So you have to be really careful and start off really slow and light. Don't use any pressure at all, basically. It's, you can't take away ink, but you can add more if you're not giving it enough. I personally like a sort of more heavy-handed look, but on this second envelope here, I did a little bit lighter just to show you that it's, you don't have to go crazy like I did. So you can either go really light or really heavy and just be gentle, or you'll get those heavy dauber marks. Like this envelope here is quite intense with its aging antiqued look. So this is the final card I'm going to show you today. I made 2 different front pieces with some different oxide ink colors in them. I ended up going with the one that had pink and yellow in it, as well as my 3 main blues and greens that I had used earlier. And I did a nice antique photo daubed edge on it also. I wanted to add a little bit more interest with some green, so I chose another one of the Tim Holtz stamps. It looks like, old coffee rings, and it's from the set that had the nice gradiated dots that I used earlier on the other card. So normally I'm a that's good enough is good enough kind of designer, but in this case I thought the rings were a little too intense. So I gave them a spritz with my sprayer and then pulled up some of that ink with a baby wipe and dried it off with my heat gun. From there I chose some more of the magic wax in turquoise, and I wanted to make a vignette feel, so I just rubbed it all over the center of the card, and it seems kind of intense and bright, but what that's going to do is add sort of a highlight, a pop of color that pulls everything together in the midst of the card, and when I lay my die cuts over it, it looks amazing. So I wanted to show you how you could do something a little bit different with this kind of card. So once I cut my mat down to perfect size for my small card, because I always make the mats a little bit bigger than they should, I chose to, instead of sticking die cuts right to it, actually cut the dies from the card itself. So I tried to figure out which dies would look best, and it took me a little bit, but when I finally decided, I thought, wow, this looks amazing. So I just cut them out and then attached my card front to the base, and decided as well to use those black dies as inlays. So it just gives it something so delightful it just feels like an old world antique when you have an inlay in. Yeah, look at that. And it was very satisfying to pop them in. It felt a bit like doing a puzzle. So now that I've put my inlays in, the card is pretty much complete, and that vignette of the beautiful wax in the center really makes those inlays pop up. I chose to use one of the pieces of die that was left over from cutting out of the front piece inside as a little bit of decoration, but again, you could put easily like a cream mat inside to write your sentiment on. I felt like it wasn't quite complete as it was, so I took an earlier scrap that I had played around with the oxide dies, and I stamped the word hello onto it, or you could use any sort of small sentiment, and then I tied a little twine bow and use some adhesive to attach it to the front of the card. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my very first tutorial with Scrapbook Warehouse. I appreciate them letting me into their studio so much to play with all their gorgeous tools and their products. You can find the complete product list of everything I used in this tutorial down below the YouTube video. And I hope you have fun and just learn to play with your oxide inks as much as I did. It was my first time using them and it was absolutely a blast. So thanks again for watching and have a great day.